I never thought that a cold cup of coffee on a meeting table could be the final signal marking the collapse of an entire chapter of my life. That morning, I, Mariah Riddlesprigger, walked into the headquarters of Bright Edge Media with the mindset of someone about to sign the biggest contract in a nearly 2-decade-long career. I had no idea that just a few hours later, I would walk out with nothing in my hands, stripped of the project I had devoted my youth to building, and branded with the very label no one in the industry ever wants to hear: irresponsible and a failure. I had worked in brand communications for over 15 years, starting as an intern and rising through the ranks by listening, working long hours, and never once complaining. Bright Edge was not where I began, but it was where I gave everything, believing I was building something that truly mattered. I still remember the day I received the call from Brooklyn Turner, the company's strategy director, a sharp, respected woman in the field. Brooklyn told me directly that she needed someone who could get things done, not just talk. I replied that I had never known how to speak without acting on it. We shook hands that day. 3 years later, I was appointed creative director for the Western region, and I was also entrusted with leading a campaign called Emotional Awakening, a sentiment-driven marketing initiative for a rising phone brand from Asia. At the time, the brand held less than 2% of the U.S. market. It was widely considered an impossible task, but I believed in the power of storytelling. I led a team of 13, developed the core concept, and oversaw the production of thematic videos centered on lasting relationships, lost trust, and how technology could reconnect what once seemed broken. It was more than just a campaign to me. It was a part of who I was, and it succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Within just 6 weeks, brand recognition tripled. Customers began referring to the brand with emotion instead of skepticism. I still remember the final night of the evaluation phase. I stayed in the office until nearly 2 a.m, editing every frame of the closing video. When I saw the final sequence play on screen, I cried, not from exhaustion, but because I knew I had created something that truly touched people. At 2:15 a.m., Brooklyn called and said just one sentence: "Mariah, if anyone asks who is behind this campaign, I will not hesitate to say your name," and I believed her. That morning, walking into the regular strategy meeting, I noticed nothing unusual. I brought my laptop, an updated presentation, and a proposal to expand into emotional education for high school students, an idea sparked by the enthusiastic responses from younger viewers. But seated at the center of the room was Greg Turner, the CFO and Brooklyn's husband. His presence was not out of the ordinary, but the look he gave me was cold and decisive. Veronica, the coordination assistant, avoided eye contact, and Eleanor Wright, the head of legal, flipped through documents without saying a single word. Brooklyn walked in last, the same sharp gaze, but this time it was used to destroy, not to protect. The meeting lasted no more than 18 minutes. I was instructed to immediately terminate all system access, return my company badge, and hand over the project due to mismanagement of the budget and lack of transparency in production spending. There was no argument. No one spoke up for me. Brooklyn remained silent. I did not even have time to react. I simply stood, walked out, and forgot the cooling cup of coffee still sitting on the table. It left a small ring of water, spreading outward like a burn. I went home in a daze I could not explain. My phone began to buzz with messages from former colleagues, not to comfort, but to probe. An anonymous email landed in my inbox, containing forged financial documents with my name on them. I knew what was happening. Greg had once asked me to allow the finance team to bypass certain approval steps to speed up production. I agreed, confirming it via email. I never imagined that would be the very thing used against me. Brooklyn once said that trust was the only foundation for communication, and that belief kept me from protecting myself. I lost my job, my reputation, and faced the threat of a lawsuit if legal action were pursued. Rumors spread quickly in the agency world. Some said I had been caught embezzling funds. Others claimed I had climbed to the top by stepping over others. Regardless of the truth, the most frightening part was not what happened, but how people chose to believe whatever made them feel more powerful when they repeated it. I used to believe in connection, in real value, in the kind of trust women extended to one another in a competitive industry like this. But in that moment, I realized all of it could be severed by a meeting that lasted less than 20 minutes. I moved in with my mother in a small town in Northern California. No one asked how I was. No one reached out. I disappeared from social media, withdrew from professional groups, and declined every coffee invitation from people who once praised me. One afternoon, I stared at the housing contract I had once dreamed of signing. Now, it was just a stack of folded papers buried in a drawer. I did not cry. I just wondered why someone like Brooklyn, who once lifted me up, could be the one to push me down so ruthlessly. And Greg, a man who once only knew spreadsheets, was now standing in my place, accepting accolades from international partners. In a leaked internal email I received by chance from an old colleague, I saw one line that stayed with me. The campaign succeeded thanks to effective coordination from the senior management team, especially the chief financial officer. Not a single mention of me. No thanks. No one questioned why the person who had been there from day one vanished without a trace. Maybe they knew, or maybe they chose not to. In the media world, the storyteller is sometimes the one paid the most to stay silent, and I stayed silent, but not forever. Some mornings I would wake up and forget, just for a moment, that I was no longer the creative director at Bright Edge, no longer the one invited on stage, no more emails to review, no midnight messages about last-minute ideas. All that remained was the old bedroom that once belonged to my younger sister, left untouched since the day she moved to France to study art. On the wall still hung an unfinished painting of sunflowers, its brushstrokes left dangling midair as if no one dared to disturb a wound that had yet to heal. I stayed in that room for nearly 3 months, not because I couldn't leave, but because I didn't know where I would go next. One rainy afternoon, my mother left a cup of ginger tea and a folded newspaper by my door. She didn't say anything, just knocked twice and walked downstairs. In the centerfold was an article about a group of university students launching a nonprofit media campaign to combat depression among students. They called themselves Revoice, and they were looking for a volunteer to guide their content team. I read the whole article, set it on the table, and stared out the window. The rain didn't last long that day, but it was enough to cool the tea before I took my first sip. I emailed Revoice the next morning. I did not say much, just one sentence. I used to work in emotional media. I don't need money. I just want to help. Our first meeting took place in a small café near the university. None of them knew who I was, and they didn't need to. Only one student named Ethan asked if I had ever worked on a campaign before. I smiled and said I had done a few things that weren't important. That answer was enough to get me in. In the early weeks, I simply observed and offered suggestions. The way these young people told stories through 30-second clips was no different from what my generation used to do. What they lacked was depth, the kind that makes a viewer pause and feel, not just scroll past. I began rewriting scripts and eventually took over content structure. No one questioned it. No one asked for more. And for the first time in months, I worked without the fear of being doubted. 3 months later, Revoice was invited to present at a community media conference in Sacramento. The team scrambled to find someone to write the speech. I volunteered and rewrote the entire slide deck using the storytelling structure I used to teach back at the agency. I still remembered the pacing, the balance, the emotional beats. On the morning of the presentation, as Ethan walked on stage and opened with a black and white short film, The room fell completely silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. When it ended, a few people stood to applaud. A local reporter came to ask for an interview. I stood behind the curtain, saying nothing. I didn't need the spotlight. I only needed to know that I could still do what I loved. That evening, as we celebrated at a small pizza place down the street, Ethan handed me a note. It was an invitation from a nonprofit in San Francisco that trained startup founders in communications. They were looking for a mentor with expertise in emotional marketing. I stared at the words for a long time. It felt like someone had just opened a door I thought had been permanently locked. I left town after 6 months with my mother. Before I left, she asked me only one thing. What kind of mindset will you bring this time? I answered with a hug and said, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose, but no longer being afraid to lose anything at all. I moved into a small apartment in the Mission District, not very bright, but it had a window that overlooked a fire escape where people like to sit and sip morning coffee. Every day, I walked to the nonprofit's downtown office, where young people gathered, people who had been rejected, who had failed to make it past the recruitment rounds of bigger agencies, but who still believed their stories could make a difference. I didn't lecture. I guided. I showed them how emotion is built from small details, like the sound of a door closing behind someone who's leaving, or the look in the eyes of someone who has lost trust. I never mentioned my past, but in every session, I saw pieces of myself reflected in them. Then one day, while reviewing strategy for a young startup helping seniors adapt to new technology, I received an email from Veronica. The subject line made me freeze. You're no longer at Bright Edge, but I still kept the old photo. I opened the message. It was a video clip from the award gala for the Emotional Awakening campaign. Greg was on stage accepting the international award, speaking about the perfect blend of strategy and creativity. Brooklyn stood in the audience, clapping steadily. No one mentioned me, but at second 37, I saw the mood board displayed on screen. It was the one I had designed, and in the last line of the notes, my name was still there, small, but not erased. I don't know why Veronica sent it, but I understood the message. Maybe she had seen enough, just like I once had. And this time, I didn't feel anger. I only knew one thing. What was once taken from me in silence, I would reclaim through action. I began rewriting the entire emotional awakening journey as an independent case study. No company names, no people named. I kept only the parts I had truly created and added the ideas I had wanted to implement but had been denied. It wasn't just a write-up. It was a declaration, a record from someone who had once been broken but still remembered every brick they had laid. When the case study was shared on a professional forum, the feedback came quicker than I expected. An angel investor emailed me. He said he had watched that campaign from the perspective of a customer and had always wondered who came up with the phrase, "Emotion does not need to be spoken, only understood." I replied that it was me. He asked, "Then why are you only showing up now?" I paused for a moment and hit send, because I once thought I no longer deserved to. I never expected a 4,000-word article to stir up so much disruption. But 3 days after The Root of Emotion was published on a professional platform for nonprofit marketing, I began receiving strange emails. A former strategy director who had worked with Bright Edge asked if I was the original author behind Emotional Awakening. An editor from Branding Now requested an interview, saying they had received too many letters from readers pointing out a strange detail, that the award recipient did not match the person who had written the campaign message. I didn't respond right away. I saved each contact, marked them one by one, and stayed quiet, watching. A week later, I received a call from Eleanor Wright, not as a lawyer, but as someone from the past. Her voice was low and cautious. "Brooklyn doesn't know I'm calling. I just wanted you to know that your name has been completely removed from our internal archives. The reason given was personnel confidentiality under company restructuring." I gave a dry laugh. She hesitated, then added, "But there's one thing they couldn't erase. Our European partner just sent a request for confirmation, asking to verify who led the creative direction in the initial phase of the campaign. They have a supplemental contract you once signed, and your signature is still on it." I thanked Eleanor without asking why she helped. In this world, not everyone is cruel, but sometimes it takes a while for people to choose the side of what is right. I knew Brooklyn had begun to feel the unease, not because of an article, but because of the reactions outside the company. In the communications world, what people fear most isn't bad news, it's doubt, and doubt spreads faster than any official statement. I didn't come forward, but I began quietly sending my original materials to partners who had previously collaborated with Bright Edge. Some responded politely, saying they appreciated my silent contributions. Others sent back archived images, mood boards with my signature in blue ink. I saved everything in a folder I named Mirror, not to display, but to remind myself that truth cannot be fully erased. Around that time, Greg started giving interviews. He spoke about his ability to read the market and his method of emotional data strategy. The words sounded refined at first glance, but anyone in the field knew they were hollow phrases designed to cover what was never his. A seasoned media expert wrote on LinkedIn that the campaign did not reflect Greg's usual voice. That comment received over 300 reactions within 2 days. Greg responded with a statement denying all rumors, but there was no soul in his writing. Someone who creates something real never has to explain so much. They let the work speak. Greg, however, spoke too much. I watched it all unfold, like a silent audience member of a play I had once starred in. Things spiraled further when the European investor announced they would suspend funding for Bright Edge due to a lack of transparency in the creative process. Brooklyn began speaking up, stating that the campaign was a team effort and that no one had the right to claim sole credit. That statement was aimed at me, even though she never said my name. But that only made people more curious. Everyone knows when someone rushes to deny something, it's usually because they are afraid of being found out. Veronica sent me a photo. It was the nameplate listing the recipient of the international award, now removed from the lobby at Bright Edge. In its place hung a generic slogan, unsigned. "They're cleaning up the front," she wrote in her message. But some things can't be wiped away, like the old message from Brooklyn at 2:15 a.m., or the video of Greg standing under the stage, not knowing whether to clap or keep his hands in his pockets. I didn't do much. I just sent those records to the lead investor, the one who once said, "I only believe in people who work for something real." And I wrote one line. I was part of that campaign. If verification is needed, I'm ready. 2 days later, I received an email from an independent media organization inviting me to present the original case study at their annual conference. They didn't care about internal disputes. They just wanted a different perspective on a campaign that had once changed how people viewed emotional marketing. I accepted, but not under the name Mariah Riddlesprigger. I used an old pseudonym, the same one I had used when writing psychology columns during my university days. I wanted my words to be heard before anyone recognized who I was. That was the only way to know if I still deserved to be heard. During the presentation, I walked through the ideation process, how the team interviewed real people, how we chose imagery, color tones, and background music to guide the viewer's emotions. I never mentioned the old company. I never named names, but everyone in the room understood who I was not naming. When it ended, someone stood and asked if I had considered returning to the mainstream media industry. I replied that I never left. I just no longer stood in the same place. The next day, the talk was shared online, reaching over 20,000 views in just a week. A few industry publications began asking questions about the true contributors behind Emotional Awakening. This time, Bright Edge could no longer stay silent. They issued a joint statement saying that all campaigns are the result of collective effort, including those who have since left the company. But it was not enough. Because in a backup copy of a European contract, my signature was still there, next to the title Creative Lead, Phase 1. The next twist did not come from me. It came from Jennifer. She had once been rumored to be involved with Greg, tied to a scandal where her ex-husband accused Greg of breaking up their marriage. Jennifer called me. Her voice was small and broken. "I know what you did," she said. "And I also know that he used my name to fill in the gaps of a campaign that should have belonged to you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I told her she didn't need to apologize. Just tell the truth. And she agreed to write everything down, including how Greg had asked her to sign her name on partnership agreements to avoid cross audits. I sent that document to Eleanor. She went quiet for a while before replying. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I responded. "I don't want revenge through harm. I just want the truth to find its rightful path." There was a very small shift within me after Jennifer's call, so subtle that I might have missed it if I hadn't sat still long enough. It wasn't the feeling of victory, nor the satisfaction of watching someone who once pushed me down now scramble for explanations. It was the realization that my memories no longer revolved around their existence. My story was no longer a chain of reactions to others. From this point forward, it would be a series of choices I made for myself. I sat with a cup of cooled coffee under the harsh midday sun in San Francisco, opened my laptop, and began typing the first lines of the first project to ever carry only my name. I called it Seed, a micro-agency platform connecting individuals and startups who wanted to communicate with emotional depth but lacked the budget or resources to begin. It would run on a freelance coordination model, focused on authentic storytelling, not simulated experience. Each project would include a community contribution component, with at least 10% of profits reinvested into supporting vulnerable groups. I called it the planting value strategy. I didn't need a crowd. I only needed the right people. Ethan from the Revoice team was the first to say yes. He didn't ask about pay, just when we would begin. Veronica, after hearing the idea, asked to take charge of social sentiment analysis. I sent invitations to several people who had left large agencies after losing faith in what the industry claimed to value. They didn't need convincing. They already understood. I didn't call Seed a company. I called it a place where people who had once been left behind could begin telling their stories again. 3 months later, we signed our first project. A nonprofit organization in Portland wanted to launch a campaign about the silent survivors, those who had been betrayed in their jobs, who had lost everything because their trust was stolen, yet were never recognized. I didn't know if it was a coincidence or an intentional choice, but when I read the project description, I knew the moment had arrived. We decided not to make advertisements. Instead, we would produce a series of real interviews, no staging, no scripted lines, just raw expressions, honest settings, and silence. For the first time, I appeared in the debut episode of that series, not as someone whose work was stolen, but as the narrator. I asked each person we interviewed just one question. Has there ever been someone who once believed in you, who no longer does? And in the silence that followed, I saw myself a year ago. The campaign spread faster than we had expected. People who had walked away from the industry returned to share. Some asked to collaborate. Others just sent a thank you. But the most important responses came from the clients themselves. They said it was the first time they had seen media that didn't manipulate. They said they felt seen, not steered. They said it felt real. An industry journal published a full analysis of the Seed campaign without cuts. My name appeared clearly as content director in a major forum. The topic communications after the fall was selected as the official panel discussion. I was invited to speak, and this time I didn't use a pseudonym. I stepped forward with my real name, my real voice, and experiences that no longer needed to be softened. 1 week after the forum, I received an email from Brooklyn. It was short and contained no justifications. She said she only wanted to meet once and speak clearly. I read it again and again, but didn't respond immediately. I knew it wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to salvage some dignity, but I no longer needed her acknowledgement to know I was right. I had already proven that, not through attacks, not through negative media, but with a powerful comeback built from the very thing that once broke me. I eventually saw Brooklyn again, not in an office or at a conference. It was at a community outreach event, where she was the guest of honor for her strategic leadership in a network of charities. She noticed me from a distance. Her expression froze for a moment, but it wasn't remorse. I walked past her without stopping, because I understood some confrontations don't need words. The outcome already speaks for itself. A major turning point rarely comes from a single act. It comes from the long days you choose not to retaliate, from every day you build while others tear down, from each quiet moment you keep working while others grow loud, trying to cover up what is hollow. I was ready to return, not to reclaim the past, but to build the present with clean hands and trust I had learned to place in the right places. And that was the moment I knew. I was no longer someone who had been betrayed. I was someone who had walked through it, carrying my story like a small light, bright enough to ensure I would never lose my way again. I once imagined that one day I would face Greg Turner in a room full of witnesses, documents, and relentless questions, but that moment never came in the way I expected. When the day finally arrived, I was somewhere else entirely, and my presence was no longer needed for him to realize that everything was slipping out of his control. It was a Monday morning when Bright Edge officially lost 3 major contracts in a single month, including a chain of international clients I had once personally helped secure. Part of it was due to investors pulling back, part because the media had quietly begun raising questions about the transparency of their recent campaigns. But the deeper reason was simpler. They no longer had anyone who could write something that truly reached the human heart, and that was a lesson Greg had never been willing to learn. I did not appear in the press, nor did I share any comments about the company's decline. But during Seed's internal year-end gathering, as the team reflected on our first year, with 7 completed campaigns, 4 community projects launched, and 2 nonprofit startups successfully funded through authentic storytelling, I looked around and simply told them that we had come far enough to never need to look back again. That was the first time I felt light, not because I had let go of the past, but because I no longer carried the weight of anger while still remembering every scar it had left. Brooklyn disappeared from the public eye for nearly half a year. No new articles, no speaking engagements. Internal news quietly spread that she had stepped away from all leadership roles, citing health reasons and the need for personal realignment. I didn't verify it. I didn't need to. In my heart, one truth remained clearer than any rumor. Those who built their reputation by holding others down would eventually lose their footing once there was no one left to push, and when they had nothing left to cover themselves with, the emptiness would reveal itself. 1 year after Seed was founded, I was invited back to my old university to speak with communication students. I stood at the same lecture podium, looking out at faces still dreaming about a world filled with creative color, and I shared that I had once been pushed out of a boardroom for trusting the wrong people, that I had once been erased from the very project I had built. I told them that at one point I believed I no longer belonged in this industry, but then I learned something. True value does not come from where you sit in a company. It comes from whether you dare to hold on to what makes you different when everything around you demands that you conform. A young woman asked if I had forgiven those who had wronged me. I paused for a few seconds and said that I didn't have the authority to forgive them on behalf of life itself, but I did have the right to choose not to let them define the rest of mine. I didn't need them to bow an apology. Their silence, when they saw me succeed, was enough. When Seed was named among the 10 most influential social communication initiatives at that year's international conference, I did not walk on stage alone. I let Ethan, the once first-year student who had sent me a simple message, take the mic. He recounted the day we met at a small campus café, when he had no idea who I was, and he ended with a line that brought the room to a quiet stillness. We learned one thing. He said, "Emotion is not something to be manipulated. It's something to be nurtured." And if anyone asks who taught us that, I would answer, it was Mariah. I stood below the stage, surrounded by the spotlight's glow, not feeling pride or triumph, but something much quieter, like a river that has flowed far enough to no longer cling to the mud it once passed through. I knew the road ahead was still long, but now I could walk it without the fear of being misjudged, because I had already seen myself clearly through the work I created. Greg eventually stepped down from all executive roles. A brief interview revealed he was considering a shift into independent financial investment. No more invitations to speak, no more mention of his emotional data strategies. Brooklyn started a personal blog, writing about her healing journey after a career collapse. In one post, she mentioned someone from her past without naming names, saying, "I once lost that person because I thought I understood more than they did." I read it, then closed the tab. I didn't comment. I understood something very clearly. Sometimes, consequences do not come in the form of scandals or verdicts. They come through having to live the rest of your life without the people who once brought you something real. I did not wish them pain. I only wished they would understand. And whether they did or not was no longer mine to carry. I kept living. I kept writing. I kept guiding Seed deeper into the stories of people who had been forgotten. Every one of them had a chapter where they had been pushed down, but as long as they still wanted to tell it, there was still a chance to be heard properly. One day, I sat rewriting my old journal and came across a line I had written after I was fired. "I don't know where I will go from here." And next to it, I added a new line. "I will go where I deserve to be trusted again,